1 minute for an opening statement.
Hello, my name is James McGlinnis, and I'm for Sheriff of Pinellas County, Florida. I've spent the last 10 years investigating, researching, and looking into the corruption of the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department, the fiscal waste of the Sheriff's Department, and the individual actions that are taken by several of the deputies that have impacted the community here. Over that 10 years, I have identified so many different areas that need to be changed and need to be adjusted, and new policies that need to be implemented. I've also researched policies that have worked all over the world, and I've come up with an expansive platform, which is on my website, mclinnis4sheriff.com. And it allows you to go out and look and see every single policy that I will change to end all of the issues that we're having here in Pinellas County now, which are the same basic issues that the protesters all across the United States are protesting against.
Thank you, Mr. McGlinnis. Mr. Santana, 1 minute for your opening statement.
Hello, my fellow Democrats. My name is Eliseo Santana, and I am running to be our next sheriff. There is another Democrat running, and that is why we're having a primary on August the 19th. My opponent and I have very similar goals on paper, but there is one huge difference: experience. My serving with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department for over 30 years implementing technology and modernizing the agency will allow me to quickly implement the progressive changes needed to achieve transparency and accountability. Body cameras will be deployed. I will stop the militarization of our police. I will increase training and de-escalation. I will target our resources more effectively. I can do it. With your vote, we can do it.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. All right, first question. This goes to you, Mr. Santana. What relevant experience do you have which qualifies you for the position of Pinellas County Sheriff? You have 2 minutes to respond.
I served for 30 years as a technologist, modernizing the agency. I have seen the problem firsthand and up close. I have been a participant in evaluating body camera implementation over 20 years ago. It was my project, and I made it to be feasible. I saw the changes that can happen. I saw the accountability and transparency that been at that time. Our sheriff chose not to do that. As sheriff, I will implement that quickly and swiftly. We have the technology, we have the ability. I am somebody that have seen the militarization of our police force, and it can be stopped. It will be stopped. We will make sure that these changes happen. We will make sure that all of our citizens are treated fairly.
Mr. Santana, specifically when you've worked in a leadership role, how would you describe your leadership style? 2 minutes.
I'm a team builder. I'm able to bring in the experts, the community leaders, the people that know the situation and the problem, and they have a stake in it. And then collectively, we're able to come up with the most effective solution. Because being a sheriff is not being a dictator. It's not being the one that tells everybody how it's going to be, but we need to change that culture. I am going to be bringing in those individuals from the community because this is our agency, and we're going to create something that we can all be proud of. That culture has to change at the very top, effective at what they do, and we will have that change in our institution. We will all be proud of such a sheriff's department in our Pinellas County, Santana.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. Next question to you. What is the number one issue you will need to deal with as sheriff? What will you do specifically to address that issue? You have 2 minutes.
You know, our deputies are trained to be able to take care of situations and problems, and they have their classes on. Their training is to be able to find an infraction, to find some kind of a law being broken, and then their tools that they have is to arrest. And if somebody resists arrest, then the only tools that they currently have is to escalate, to have the use of force so that they get control. I am going to initiate training, able to give them other tools. to be able to allow them to de-escalate the situation and prevent that from rising to a moment in which they have to use greater force. But even before that, I want to make sure that if that more than 3/4 of the time that a police officer responds is for something that it does not deal with crime, it has to do with mental illness, homelessness, drug use. We will get the specialists, the people that are able to resolve that and be able to address it, to be the first responders and build the team collectively to make sure that that happens. And that is going to take some effort to be able to recruit, to be able to set the processes, and then to implement. But I will start that immediately upon being sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. Mr. McLinnis, same question. What is the number one issue you will deal with as sheriff, and what will you do specifically to address that issue?
I think that the number one issue for me is going to be the mindset, and as Mr. Santana says, the culture of the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department. I think that 80% of their training is spent on how to hurt or injure or kill or commit violence against somebody and protect themselves in the process. But I think that what we fail to do is we fail to understand that the over-militarization of the sheriff's office has really just developed into an arrest culture where the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department arrests people for extremely minor and petty offenses. Here in Pinellas County, about 80% of the crimes with real victims that are reported to Sheriff Galtieri go unsolved. Instead, he's running around and criminalizing people for things like trespassing or a little bit of cannabis. He himself said that since this COVID-19 hit, that he's been trying to reduce the number of arrestees at the jail. He sent out an email saying that he wanted all the police officers in Pinellas County to pass judgment and use notices to appear. And he then stated that he went from about 130 to 140 arrests a day down to about 30. Which means that he himself is admitting that they arrest about 100 people a day for minor offenses that could have been handled with a notice to appear. And it's also my position that a lot of those people didn't even need to have a notice to appear and clog up our court systems. We don't need to keep arresting homeless people for trespassing. We don't need to arrest people on the beach for open container. We don't need to arrest people for personal use drugs when what they need is treatment. So the thing that I'm going to do and focus on the most is I'm going to stop the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department and the rest of the police agencies in Pinellas County from preying upon the people of Pinellas by over-arresting them, over-criminalizing them, and shoving them through a court system, which then tends to brand them and stigmatize them so that they can't get apartments, so they can't live a normal life. I will also end the practice of exposing them to the public shame or ridicule of just being arrested, when here in America, arrest does not mean you're guilty.
10 seconds.
The bottom line is I'm going to roll back arrests, and I'm going to stop the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department from preying on people, and we're going to focus on crimes with actual victims.
Thank you, Mr. McLinnis. We will now be asking the candidates questions submitted by voters prior to this evening's event. We ask that each candidate be specific and detailed in response to each question. The candidates will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. So the first question to you, Mr. McLinnis, how will your budget reflect your top 3 priorities?
Well, currently the sheriff's budget is about $325 million just from the county alone. And he has multiple millions of dollars that he collects from multiple other programs, federal grants, that type of thing, that he is not watched. There's nobody watching over him where he spends that money. That's why he goes out and he just buys himself a new $1.5 million plane when no county sheriff needs a new airplane. They have so much waste as far as the toys that they have. They had a $350,000 cold drink machine out at the beach deputies while they were on the beach patrol 6 feet apart. The bottom line here is Sheriff Galtieri spent $8 or $9 million on having deputies at the beach over the COVID-19 lockdown. That's insane. He spent $2.3 billion in his budget since he's been in office. And most of that, in my opinion, has been wasted. We have a new $100 million jail that he had built just to fill up with more people that he arrests. So the bottom line for me is I'm going to reduce the number of arrests. I'm going to reduce the cannabis enforcement. I'm going to roll back a lot of the costs. And I think that I can save the Pinellas County taxpayers about $100 to $140 billion single year as sheriff here in Pinellas County. And then we can then use those funds and reallocate them in ways that really help the community. Job training, actually hiring people at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department and in the county. The county and the Sheriff's Department are the two largest here in Pinellas County, but they don't hire any of the homeless. They don't hire any of the people that are struggling. And I'm going to turn that around. I'd like the sheriff's department to be someplace that everybody is welcome to come. If you have a drug problem, I'd like you to be able to come to the sheriff's office and we will have drug treatment options for you there instead of just handcuffs. Handcuffs have addiction, and handcuffs have never cured a number of society's ills like homelessness. So just, we're going to stop arresting and criminalizing everybody. And I think that when we take that $125 million out of the budget, I think we can go ahead and roll that. I think we can go ahead and roll that back to the point where we still provide effective service by only going after victims with crimes with real victims.
Thank you, Mr. McLinnis. Mr. Santana, how will your budget reflect your top 3 priorities?
There's, as mentioned before, the amount that is in the budget for the sheriff's department is huge and enormous. The sheriff has the ability of moving money around and putting things that are priority. My priority is going to be to make sure that the body cameras are implemented because it's essential. It's essential that we have accountability and transparency. It seems to be a cornerstone, but that's just a fraction of the money that is going to be there. Being able to train our officers to be able to truly be able to respond and be able to address the issues is something that is a longer term, and we're going to have to implement some technology to be able to bring in the specialists, the social workers, the treatment center people, the people that are specialists in dealing with mental illness and homelessness into that equation by virtue of some Zoom reality or actually having them there. I have the technology knowledge to be able to implement these things quite rapidly, and we're going to have a huge impact on the response that we have with people when we get called in, and that is essential that we report to that. The sheriff's budget needs to be addressed openly. We need to be able to bring in those community leaders to be able to look at it, assess it, and then guide me accordingly of what areas we can best use this money in. Right now, it's like a big secret. Yes, it's available openly, but it's a big secret because within all that data, I have the experience to make these things happen.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Santana. Next question, going to Mr. Santana. Black Lives Matter is highly visible in the news today. What is your approach towards 3 things, improving 3 things? Unbiased policing, protection of individual and community human rights, and the culture of officer accountability. 2 minutes.
All of these things come together. And that is exactly why we need to have a change at the very top. That culture that gives individuals the ability of acting without any immunity. And let me tell you that not all officers are bad, but those that are, we need to make sure that the other officers are able to point them out and address it. We need to be able to bring out the community to let us know what is happening. It is essential that we protect the rights of individuals to go out and demonstrate. It's a constitutional right, and I will protect it for those individuals coming out to protest. I might even be one of the ones out there demonstrating because there's a lot of changes that need, and it's essential that we hold people accountable. And so this is one of the things that we have to institute is changing the leadership. And changing the leadership, we're then able to allocate the resources, and $300+ million is more than adequate to be able to do the things we need to do. It just takes that leadership to be able to make it happen. I welcome the community input in being able to allocate these resources and being able to change the culture, because it's not from the top as it's always been, but it's actually from the bottom of the change.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. Mr. McLinnis, the same question to you. Black Lives Matter is highly visible in the news today. What is your approach to improving 3 things? Unbiased policing, protection of individual and community human rights, and a culture of officer accountability. 2 minutes.
Well, I think the first thing that needs to be done is to remove Sheriff Robert Galtieri. In my opinion, his racist policies and practices have permeated the entire Pinellas County Sheriff's Department. And if we look at what he's done and what he's not done, like, for instance, not arresting Michael Drejka when he shot Marquise McLaughlin, you have a situation where the community has shown repeatedly that he doesn't care about the community. Sheriff Galtieri literally pulled over a black woman, grabbed her hair and yanked her by her hair out of a car so hard he ripped 2 handfuls out of her hair out of her head. And of course, he didn't get himself in trouble for that. So what does that say to the people that worked at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department? What does that teach the deputies that work beneath him? And there is a horrible racist culture within the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department. There was a 1980 consent decree by the Department of Justice that required them to change all of their hiring, training, and promotion practices. Yet if you look at the 32 top members of the command staff, there's only one person of color out of the entire 32. And so we have this culture already ingrained that is racist within the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department. And from my position, I've been out in the community. Mr. Santana says he might be out there protesting. Well, I have been out there protesting. I've been protesting multiple times with these people. I've listened to them. I've visited with the families that have been killed by Pinellas County Sheriff's Department agencies. And the problem that we have here in Pinellas County is you have a threefold issue. You have the unions where Sheriff Galtieri signs union contracts that give away any teeth where he can actually eliminate or fire officers. And he does that because those same union contracts also protect him and his dirty crony buddies. Then you have the use of force policies, and the use of force policies are written also to allow officers to go ahead and take over and do things based on fear rather than necessity. And this allows them to get away with the killing because as long as they were within the policies, they can't be criminalized or held accountable. And then officer review. If we have an issue, they need to be investigated properly, and that does not happen. Instead, here in Pinellas County, Sheriff Galtieri just investigates them to cover it up, and that changes when I'm sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. McLinnis. Next question for you, Mr. McLinnis. Pinellas County Sheriff's Office is considered a pioneer in the use of facial recognition technology. Studies have shown that this leads to misidentification of people of color more often than white people. What will your approach be towards using this technology?
Well, one of Sheriff Galtieri's pet projects that he's had for the last 10 years since he's been in office, and even before that, was the facial recognition program he has. It's absolutely ridiculous that the people of Pinellas County should be funding a facial recognition program when they were actually putting cameras at the airport and collecting faces of people that had done nothing wrong. We have approximately, according to Sheriff Galtieri, he's got almost 30,000 faces in his facial recognition program when we only have less than 1 million people here in Pinellas County and less than that in the entire state. So the question is, why are we even doing this program? Why do we even have that? So one of the first things that I'm going to do as far as the facial recognition program is simple. I'm going to end it. I'm going to stop it. There are federal facial recognition programs, and there are also private sector facial recognition programs that are a lot more effective than we as Pinellas County citizens don't have to pay for. And I'm not going to be using that to spy on people, to monitor them. You go around Pinellas County, every single intersection has a camera. And this is part of Sheriff Galtieri's citizen spying that he does on everybody, which includes things like license plate readers, which includes things like social media spying. He has his agents and deputies have fake profiles and go out into the community and pretend they're people that they're not. And the whole thing is basically a J. Edgar Hoover style campaign to have a file on everybody here in Pinellas so that he can criminalize them. And I'm going to end the citizen spying of the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department and save the taxpayers money so they're not paying to have themselves spied on.
Thank you, Mr. McLinnis. Mr. Santana, same question to you. Pinellas County Sheriff's Office is a pioneer in the use of facial recognition technology. Studies have shown that leads to misidentification of people of color more often than white people. What will be your approach to using this technology?
I've actually seen that implementation, that the error rates is significantly higher for people of color. And it is important that we recognize that and that people are not prosecuted or pursued because of it. As I stated at the beginning, my fellow Democrat that is running for this office and we have very similar approaches and very similar things that we value. I value the privacy of the individual, and I'm sure that he does also. These are things that we're going to make sure that they're properly used. If they are used, if there is some value to them, and if they're not, we're going to remove them usage. And that just points to one of many things that we're going to evaluate. it is essential that we have somebody in there that has the right heart, the knowledge, and the ability to make these decisions. But even more than one that is a team builder, one and people from the community and the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, those individuals that are within that area and take in ownership in the outcome of these things. And there are many more things like that that need to be approached. And it is essential that we bring in the community to be aware of them, because these things often happen in secrecy, and we cannot. I want accountability and transparency in the agency, because I want the agency to be, I'm going to build an agency we can all be proud of. We.
Mr. Santana, are you there? I think Mr. Santana's.
Our community.
Are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, you froze up there for a minute. So you have about 30 seconds left.
I am not sure where we left at, but I want to emphasize that we have very similar goals, because as Democrats, I value the privacy of the individual, and we want to make sure that these programs are evaluated in the light. I'm going to bring in community leaders to be able to evaluate and look at these things and to approach them. And if they're not needed, we're going to remove them.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. Next question goes to you. What is your position on a strong and effective Citizens Advisory Board? 2 minutes.
Essential. It is essential that any acts that we do, particularly those that require a use of force, that be evaluated by a group of community leaders that are able to see it, and they themselves can come up with the rationale. But in order for them to be able to evaluate and see it, it is that we implement body cameras and also cameras in the vehicles, and be able to have the ability of being able to have that recorded and be able to get playback, so that knowledge. Firsthand of what is training we're going to increase that and openness. It is one of the first things that I'm going to do, is create a community board that will be able to address and to hold our officers accountable.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. Mr. McClennis, what is your position on a strong and effective Citizens Advisory Board?
Given any teeth, they're usually not allowed to have access to records, and they wind up making recommendations that the police industry has a tendency to just ignore. And that's what I've seen happen all across the country in these citizen advisory boards. And I think that as Sheriff of Pinellas County, I think I would welcome any citizen input and observation of what I do. But I think that I'm going to probably be harsher than any citizen review board ever would be on bad officers. I think that they would watch what I'm doing, and I don't think that they'd have much to add to what I'm going to be doing. The part of the problem that we have, as an example, is the lack of body cameras that Sheriff Galtieri does not have. But it's once you have the body cameras, it's what you do with that. I'm going to actually have a policy in place that if a deputy or an officer turns off his body camera, then he may be terminated for doing that. But also, if he has a encounter with a citizen and his body camera was not on, then his testimony of the event that's going to happen is going to be discounted, and the citizen's testimony is going to be taken as fact if they decide to turn off their body camera or if it happens to actually malfunction. Another big issue with this area is records. Sheriff Galtieri is a violator of Title 10, Chapter 119 public records laws on a regular basis. He tries to, like, I asked for a single email, his first email of his purchase of a plane discussion, and he wanted to charge me $4,600 for one email. Okay, and that's how he keeps his records secret and his corruption secret. I call it his transparency tax. And here at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department, we have employees that work in the records department. We don't have to charge people $4,500 to see an email. And my records are similar to a public library. If you want to come check something out and take a look. So if you open up the agency to that type of scrutiny, then a non-LEO enables me
to. What is your position on working with ICE?
My position on working with ICE is complicated. And what I mean by that is I disagree with Sheriff Galtieri's position that he has the ability or the right to do an end run against around the United States Constitution. He's basically sold the people out of Pinellas County out for 50 pieces of silver to the federal government by violating their constitutional rights, by holding them after there is no more hold for them here. If a person gets arrested and they have a $250 bond, if they pay that $250 bond, they should be allowed to leave. End of story. That's the way the Constitution works. But what Sheriff Galtieri does is he accepts a $50 payment to hold those people past their constitutional release so ICE can get around to coming. My position is if they want them bad enough, they have to get here fast enough. Bottom line is I don't want to work with ICE if it's violating the Constitution, because I will be a 100% constitutional officer. Every rule, every law, every obligation that we have is going to be filtered through the United States Constitution. If the United States Constitution says it should not be done, and then it shall not be done at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department, including holding people over for ICE so I can pocket $50 and destroy their rights.
Thank you. Mr. Santana, what is your position on working with ICE? 2 minutes.
I am not going to be an agent of ICE. These laws do not make our community safer. In many ways, it actually makes our situation here locally worse. I've seen individuals that have been here for 20 years and they've had families, their children were born here, they have employment, they have they're paying their rent on their home, their food on the table, and they're having a stable home environment. The moment that we, as stated before, take that $50 silver payment and put that individual into jail, they will be picked up and they can be deported. And what happens, the result is that our community members, individuals, our children that are living in this county, then do not have a place to live at. Suddenly went to being food insecure. And it's a tragedy that occurs. If somebody is a criminal, if somebody violates the law in a violent way, I don't care what their status is, I will deal with them and they will be in jail. But somebody that is normally somebody that is a good person of character in the community, to be harshly treated that way is unacceptable, and it does not lead to our community being safer. When you have a crime committed in that kind of a group, and they fear calling the police to be able to address it because they would be deported, that stops them from calling us and for us to address that crime and stop it. And it becomes a cancer on our society. We need to make sure that people feel good about calling in for help if they need it, and for us to give them that help, not to be agents of ICE.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. Next question to you as well. What is your position on armed guards in Pinellas schools?
Wow. You know, our sheriff was at the forefront of that, with leading the commission that recommended that we have armed individuals, even stating that veterans, teachers, people, citizens in good standing can have a gun within our schools. I will tell you that having a weapon like that in the school is not going to lead to a better outcome. It's not going to give us that security that we need. I have addressed issues in some of our schools, and I have seen the technology aspect of being able to better give that security, limiting access to the compound, being able to have true ability of seeing what is happening when it's needed, and to be able to have the police that's responding be able to have the eyes within that building when it is needed and is critical, are more essential and more creating of that element of security. If because now we have a law by the state that requires that we have it, I will make sure that every single SRO, school resource officer on the sheriff's department, goes through special training in being able to be counselors, not law enforcement officers, but counselors for those individuals, for the students that are there. And when the moment arises for them to be able to use what they need to keep them safe, but we need to have more nurses, we need to have more counselors in that school. And somehow, because we're mandated to have that SRO there, I'm going to make sure that they are more trained in that capacity of being counselors, so that they can truly help our community and change that culture. I do not want guns in
10
school,
seconds.
but it is mandated by the state. Vote for some representative that will change the law. In the meantime, I will make sure that the right person is there.
Okay. Mr. McLinnis, what is your position on armed guards in Pinellas County Schools?
Well, as far as armed guards, it would depend on the guard and what their responsibilities and what their powers were. I am absolutely vehemently opposed to having Pinellas County Sheriff's deputies within the school with the powers to arrest. I have seen these officers in person abusing children at the Pinellas County schools. My video taped 2 Pinellas County deputies brutalizing a 14-year-old student at Seminole High School. I drive by her school or I drop her off and I see 3 Pinellas County Sheriff's Department cars parked out in front of her school every day. And it shocks me that we have these $70,000 vehicles, 3 at a time, parked out there when all these officers do is drive them to school, park them in there, and then drive them back home again. They don't need those vehicles. So my position is there will not be sheriff's officers in these schools, because having the officers with the power of arrest and having these officers that were trained to be hammers, they're going to view these kids as nails, and a lot of them are going to get criminalized. Sheriff Galtieri has done more for the school to prison pipeline than anybody else in the entire state of Florida by trying to force all these schools to have police inside the schools. And the schools are now becoming more like prisons. An actual school shooting is such a rare occurrence. Literally, if you do the statistics, you are twice as likely to win the Powerball than you are as a student to get killed at a school. The only school shooting that we've ever had here in Pinellas County were 2 kids that took 2 guns from a Pinellas County deputy and brought them to school. And that was years ago. And so the problem that we have here is Sheriff Galtieri went around and scared the whole state, saying it's going to come to your school next. And that was just such an over-exaggeration. And I think he did this because he wanted to expand the school powers, bring these officers into the school, and try and indoctrinate these kids that this is the law, you better listen to us, you better do what we're told, and that's the way it's going to be. And these kids are afraid of these officers, and that just needs to stop. I don't have a problem with an armed guard that's there in case there's an issue, but these armed guards should not have the power to arrest. They should not be criminalizing these kids, and they should not be having a paddy wagon come to the school and pick up children on a regular basis. I think we need to end the school to prison pipeline, and that starts with getting police officers with arrest capabilities out of our schools.
Thank you. Next question to you, Mr. McLinnis. Mass incarceration in the United States is now identified as a violation of the United Nations human rights laws. This unequal policy inflicts great expense on our society in terms of increased mental illness, poverty, and violence. What will you do about this using research-driven, proven techniques as a guide? You have 2 minutes.
Well, the whole thing about mass incarceration, that all started with the Law and Order, lock them all up, throw away the key, put them in jail forever, mandatory prison sentences. All of those things are part of Sheriff Galtieri's culture. He's been raised in that his entire life, and he sees no other way, which is why he arrests 140 people a day here in Pinellas County over minor crimes and tries to criminalize everybody he can. But the bottom line here for mass incarceration is mass incarceration isn't a legislative issue. Mass incarceration occurs at the level where the handcuffs are put on. And so the handcuffs are the man who puts the handcuffs on, that's who starts mass incarceration. And the whole issue with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department is they go ahead and they arrest so many different people, and that's what starts the process. You can't have mass incarceration until the handcuffs are put on. And the bottom line here is Sheriff Galtieri puts handcuffs on way too many people. Now, I can address that by stopping the flow of people into the jails, and we can end mass incarceration here. The Pinellas County Jail is the 15th largest jail in the entire United States county-wise, and we are the 437th largest county. I mean, it's absolutely absurd that we have so many people incarcerated here in Pinellas County, and I think we need to set an example for the rest of the state and lower the number of inmates that we have in every jail. And the only people that should be in jail are people that committed crimes with actual victims, people with a burglary or robbery or an assault, or someone who's actually a danger to the community, instead of having people that have open container, or they didn't get their driver's license paper filled out, or they couldn't pay their car insurance that day. So I'm going to be ending mass incarceration at the source by drastically reducing the number of arrests and the criminalization of the citizens of Pinellas County.
Thank you. Mr. Santana, same question to you, which I can repeat if you'd like me to, but same question to you.
You know, I have to agree with the statement that was just said. You know, this is just common sense. If we start to criminalize, and we have under the sheriff's administration that we currently have, being homeless, having a mental illness crisis, and drug usage is treated as a crime, and this leads to having our jails overflowing with individuals who, upon being arrested and put in there, if they had a job, they most likely lost it. And now when they get loose from the jail, whether it be days or whether it be months, they now do not have a job. They have a record. They're going to have a very hard time being able to make ends meet. Incarcerating creates more problems. That is why I will institute to make sure that we have the right person addressing that 911 call when somebody is asking because of a mental crisis that is happening. Let's have somebody that is trained to be able to resolve it, and not somebody, as said before, that's a deputy, that the only tool they have is to arrest and take you into jail. That does not resolve the problem. It only aggravates it and makes it more. We need to rethink the culture of law enforcement in Pinellas, and I have the ability, and I will implement it and make the changes quickly, because we cannot arrest ourselves into security. That is something that our current sheriff has tried, is doing, and if he stays in power, will continue to do that policy. It is essential we end it and actually have solutions that are viable and that are long-term. Incarceration is not the answer.
10 seconds. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Santana. Johnny, if you want to get two questions from the chat box ready, I have one more question to ask here. But going to Mr. McLinnis, will you pledge to do a complete background check on any candidate, current or a new hire, on the force for prior complaints, signs of racism, misogyny, or any unnecessary use of force? Does this include prior employments and social media?
Yeah, it's actually kind of crazy that we have a situation where they don't do that. We had a deputy that had a road rage incident, pulled a gun on somebody. And then when they did the investigation on who she was and what her relationship was, she was actually a friend of Sheriff Galtieri's wife. And he had waived her psychological evaluation upon her hiring, which I thought was insane. And here we have a situation where they talk about how deputies are exposed to all of this and it's a hard job, but we only give them the one psychological evaluation at the time that they're hired. It's my position that deputies should be routinely and regularly psychologically evaluated and drug tested. As far as the going back into the situation where they were working someplace else and they did bad things, yeah, they overlooked that just to fill the seat because they have this mindset, we need more deputies, more deputies, more deputies, and we don't need more deputies. I see them all over the place, driving around, passing each other, sitting in parking lots. We have too many deputies now. So for me, I want to weed out the bad deputies, and that's not going to be that difficult for me to do. But as far as hiring new deputies coming in, sure, we should look at their background. Sure, we should look at their conduct. Sure, we should look at what they've done. And that's something that's absolutely not happened here under Sheriff Galtieri. So when we bring in new officers here, I'm going to have a different mindset when I'm looking at who these people are. I want to know, are they going to be peaceful in the community? Because the sheriff's office, its main mandate is to be keepers of the peace. And I don't see a lot of peace here in the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department. I don't see the sheriff being very peaceful with protesters. And I don't see the sheriff being peaceful with all the people that his deputies we see on videos beating and brutalizing people, and Sheriff Galtieri doesn't do anything about it. So when we have that type of a mindset at the top, it permeates all the way down to the bottom. When we have a mindset like myself, as someone who's going to try and eliminate the violence within the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department, then I think I can bring that all the way through to the very, very bottom officer, so that we treat people with courtesy, with respect, and with dignity at all times, because we're the professionals.
Thank you. Mr. Santana, same question to you. Will you pledge to do a complete background check on any candidate, current or new hire, on the force for prior complaints, signs of racism, misogyny, or unnecessary use of force, including prior employment and social media?
Absolutely. One of the practices that we have currently with this culture that is in place is that if an officer has had some infractions, or is just about ready to be found, or it escalates to a point in which there's going to be some action taken on them, they can actually terminate employment, and then they're free to go anywhere in the United States. And where do they come to? They come to Florida. You know, it is essential that anyone that we hire, we know who they are, where they came from, and if they come from another agency, that they be quality individuals, so that we can bring them in and show them our way of doing. But beyond that, we also need to address the officers and the people that are members of the sheriff's office. It's an extremely stressful environment, and we need to make sure that they are psychologically capable of being able to handle that responsibility that we put on them. And too often the sheriff and the people in charge neglect the mental health of our employees, and that often leads to that use of violence, that adverse behavior against our citizens. We need to address not only bringing them in and make sure that they're good, but when they're there, address their mental capacity and their issues, and make sure that we act accordingly, that we have healthy employees and not an atmosphere that creates radical, nasty changes in behavior, things that we've seen in the past and we will not accept now.
10 seconds. Thank you very much. Johnny, do you have 2 questions from the chat box?
Yes, I do. Are you ready for me? Okay. For those municipalities under contract, what kind of input can they have after the communities are policed?
Mr. McLennis, goes to you.
Oh, here is we have the similar culture in the Clearwater Police Department, Tarpon Springs Police Department, the St. Pete Police Department, and all of these agencies act independently within Pinellas County. However, as sheriff, as the head law enforcement agent in the entire county, I have the ability to police agency within the 4 corners of Pinellas. And routinely what Sheriff Galtieri would do is he would let the Clearwater Police run their own IA on these guys, and they would let them go because they're investigating their own coworkers and buddies. But when I'm sheriff of Pinellas County, I'm not going to rely. They can have their own IAs, but I'm not going to rely on that. If a deputy does something wrong, I will go arrest the St. Pete police officer. I will have my own investigation. People in Pinellas County will be able to come to me and report or abuse by another officer at another agency, and I'm not going to just tell them, well, go to Clearwater. If it's a Clearwater officer, deal with them. If you've ever tried to make a complaint about these officers, it's like hitting a brick wall. But I'm going to welcome complaints, and I'm going to weed out the officers that are bad, not only in the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department, but in every single police agency in this county. And if there's a bad cops in Clearwater, like bad cop in St. Pete, I'm going to be addressing them as well.
Thank you. Johnny, will you repeat the question? And Mr. Santana, please answer.
For those municipalities under contract, what kind of input can they have over the process and procedures used in the community? and the way that their communities are policed?
We have 24 municipalities within Pinellas County with over 1 million year-round residents live here, and that's without counting all of the individuals that come in on vacation or that are here seasonally. These individuals, they have the mindset of the criminal mindset. They're not going to maintain their criminal activities just within the city limits of where they're at. They're transients. They're going to be moving around. It is important that as sheriff, that's responsible for all of the well-being and the law enforcement for our county, that we have the oversight to make sure that individuals do not get away by just going from one municipality to another, but be addressed and be handled that way. We have we have some municipalities that have contracted with the sheriff's department to be able to address their law enforcement on a daily basis, Safety Harbor, Dunedin, and so on. And it is important that those citizens that are there and the governing authority that are paying us, the sheriff's department, to do that daily thing, they have a great input in what we do. But we are not going to be better in one location than the other. We're going to apply being the best throughout this county. And in that process, those cities that have their own police force will be able to elevate their practices to a new standard. And that is what we're going to be delivering, that new culture of doing law enforcement that we all need, regardless of where you live in this county.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. Johnny, one more question.
Yes. So, Barbara, we did not have very many questions about inmates and the county jail. And so I would like to ask the candidates about the status of inmates and their rights, considering that we are in a global pandemic. What would you do differently from Bob Gualtieri in this coronavirus situation with the jail system?
Mr. Santana, your answer.
The first thing is that we have to make sure that if it's not a community safety situation, we do not need to have them incarcerated. They need to be out and free. And in addition to that, we need to evaluate. There's a lot of secrecy of what is happening within the jail facility. And as sheriff, I'll be able to have access to that, and I'll be able to address these policies directly because they will be transparent to me, and I'll make sure that our community also sees what's happening, and we will address them to make sure that everybody is safe. Our loved ones that are in jail, that they are also safe. The majority of people in our jail are waiting to go to trial. They have not been found guilty of any crime, and those that are beyond a year do not stay at our county jail. They go outside into the state. So we have there are people waiting to go to trial, those that have been sentenced for less than a year, and those that are outside coming in for additional trials. We need to address their safety and concern because it is our community's safety and concern. I started instituting a lot of different camera systems within the jail facility to make sure that our officers behave in the proper professional manner and that the inmates themselves feel that they have to act in a proper manner because they're being looked at and it's being addressed.
10 seconds.
So there are many different things we can do to provide more safety. Video visitation needs to be taken out of where it's at and taken into people's homes. That's another way of doing it. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Johnny, will you repeat the question for Mr. McLinnis?
Yes. I'll kind of state it differently because I forgot what I said. But given the fact that we haven't talked about inmates, do you have a status on inmates' rights? And given that we're in a pandemic, what would you do differently from Bob Gualtieri in this COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, that's two basic questions that are very distinct. I'm going to go into dive into the COVID first. I have been making public records requests for Sheriff Gualtieri now for over a month. Every single day I request how many inmates he tested, how many deputies he tested, and what the test results have been. And I have not received a single response to my public records request for over a month. He's violating the law because he's hiding the fact that he is not testing inmates. He said he doesn't test the inmates for COVID-19 so he can come on the news and say there are no known cases of COVID at the jail. And he even got up there and arrogantly stated that he said that the jail is probably the safest place in Pinellas County for COVID-19. You have less of a chance getting COVID in my jail because of the policies and practices we've implemented, which is ludicrous. He has a huge outbreak in the jail, just like they had a hepatitis A outbreak about a year ago. And what they're doing is they're filtering all these people that don't need to be arrested into the jail. They're becoming infected and they're putting them back out into the community. And the problem is Sheriff Galtieri, about his political career, he doesn't even want to admit that we have this huge problem down there. And they've tested trustees, they've tested deputies, but they're not testing the population. And it's a huge health risk to the entire community. So obviously we have to have less prisoners, less inmates, and better medical care and complete testing. And as far as the rights that are being destroyed there at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department, we just had Galtieri revoke the bond on all these peaceful protesters. He violates their rights on a regular basis. Mr. Santana said that he put cameras in to watch the deputies because he said previously that they were stealing the money from the officers. Well, Mr. Santana had the ability to see these officers stealing these people's money on these cameras. He never reported any of them. I never saw him out any of these officers that were stealing all these people's money or were caught on all the camera systems that he had in place. I asked for those videos in the jail. They won't give them to me. Transparency, civil rights, constitutionality, less people in jail, testing. Very simple.
Thank you, Mr. McLinnis. We're going to take one last question from the chat box, and then you each have 2 minutes for a closing statement. So last question from Marilla. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Do you support discontinuing the use of the Reid technique for police training and suspect interrogation, and why? Mr. McLinnis, this goes to you.
No, I disagree with a lot of the techniques that people use in the interrogation of both suspects and witnesses here in Pinellas County. The sheriff violates the Constitution and bullies these people into making them think that they have to talk, that they're required to talk. If they ask for a lawyer, they kind of ignore that. If they try and assert their rights, they're actually bullied, and in a lot of cases, they're brutalized at the Pinellas County Jail. And we have to have a culture in the police department where it respects the constitutional rights of these people to remain silent. We're actually supposed to tell them in their Miranda rights, you have the right to remain silent. And right after they get done doing that, they try and talk them out of it. So the bottom line here is that I think the sheriff's office has to back off on trying to do everything that they have committed actual true crimes with victims like we talked about before. So as sheriff, I'm going to be implementing a policy where we, the sheriff, are going to be the ones protecting your rights because that's our job. We swore an oath to the Constitution. And because we swore an oath to the Constitution, it says in that oath, we're supposed to defend and protect that Constitution. And instead of using the Constitution, figuring out ways around it, sidelining it like the sheriff does, I would like to see us tell the people, these are your rights. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to, because that's the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Santana, do you support discontinuing the use of the Reid technique for police training and suspect interrogation, and why?
Absolutely. What we found is that when that technique is fantastic for getting prosecutions, getting people to admit that they've committed a crime they have not. And that does not make our community safe. When it makes the statistics on the sheriff's department resolving problems increase, that makes them look a lot better, but it does not make our community safe when we have the wrong person, the innocent person, taking the blame for an action that we need to investigate and make sure that we find that perpetrator and address it. The same situation is happening with rape. In January the 5th, investigative report by the Tampa Bay Times says that there are numerous amounts of rapes that have been reported to the sheriff's department, and they have closed that rape without properly investigating it, often without even making a phone call. And that makes it appear statistically that they're solving problems, but yet there could be a lot of these It is a violent crime that needs to be addressed. It is a situation in which if we use the wrong techniques just for simply getting people arrested and accepting a crime they did not commit, it makes the sheriff looks better, but it does not make our community safe. I'm going to do all of the resources to make sure that true crime is addressed and is investigated and is corrected. I am not going to spend time to try and make our statistics look better. It is important to be safe.
All right. Thank you both candidates for a very informative evening, and a special thank you to all of you who attended tonight. Just a side note, at 8:50 we will start our candidate forum for the House District 67 candidates. So thank you both for being here, and remember that the primary is August 18th. All of you out there, if you're signed up to vote by mail, make sure you fill out your ballot and turn it in. That's August 18th, or go vote in person. And now we're going to have closing remarks. Each candidate has 2 minutes. So, Eliseo, 2 minutes is yours.
You know, the reason why there has not been any kind of report of these type of stealing as mentioned by my opponent with that situation at the jail is that I instituted multiple cameras with different angles. We were able to see the denomination of those bills that were coming out, and that stopped anything that was happening before. It stopped it, and we were able to record it and keep it happening. The use of technology can be used to effectively stop issues like this. It is important for us as citizens of this county not to have the illusion of being safe because of manipulation of data. It is important that we truly be safe because crime is being investigated and is being resolved. It is important for us in this community to see the police as someone that is going to help us and not somebody that's going to ruin our lives, as so often happens when there is a red light behind us to stop us. It is essential that you choose who is going to be your candidate against this sheriff in November by voting now on August 18th. I have the experience, I have the ability to make sure that these things that we value are implemented. Vote for me. We can make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. Mr. McClinnis, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think that the hallmark of my term as sheriff is going to be to show the community that the sheriff's office is here to literally help and not to victimize. I would like to create a sheriff's department where when you look up in your rearview mirror and you see that there's a Pinellas County Sheriff's Department, you don't break out into a cold sweat wondering what he's going to try and take from you or arrest you or hurt you, that you're going to be able to just wave to them. I'd like to see my officers, instead of writing traffic tickets for taillights or cracked windshield, that they just roll up and say, hey, your taillight's out. Maybe you should get that fixed. It's for your own safety and everybody else's. Thank you. Day. I would like to see people feel comfortable with our police officers because they represent the community, both in their diversity, their ethnicity, and the way that they respect and dignity here in Pinellas County. I'm going to have a policy where no police officer is ever going to swear, cuss, or yell at people here in Pinellas County unless there's a violent situation and they're trying to get orders out to them. But we have police officers that abuse the people here in Pinellas on a regular basis, and that's got to stop. Now, we also have a situation where they're victimizing the youth. The Sheriff Galtieri has a prolific offender policy where he will take youths and mark them as prolific offenders if they were involved in a crime and suspected in two. So now we're making people prolific offenders because they're suspected. All of this has to do with the fact that the community doesn't trust the sheriff's office. They don't feel comfortable with the sheriff's office. I don't feel comfortable when a sheriff deputy is behind me in the car. I've had them make false reports against me. I've had them do things to me as well. And I know